Hey Reddit, I never thought I'd be the guy posting here, but life has a funny way of knocking the wind out of you when you least expect it. I'm Mike, 34, and I've been married to Jessica, 32, for 7 years. We have a 6-year-old son, Caleb, and up until a few weeks ago, I thought my life was fine. Not perfect, but fine. Jessica and I met in college, and she was the kind of woman who lit up a room, confident, sharp, the life of every party. She could argue you into a corner and still make you love her for it. We clicked, got married right after graduation, and built what I thought was a solid life together. Lately, though, something's been off. It started small. She'd laugh at jokes on her phone, but when I asked what was so funny, she'd say, "Oh, nothing." Her girls' nights got longer, and she started working late more often. At first, I chalked it up to the stress of her new promotion. Jessica's a marketing manager, and she thrives on being busy. I didn't want to be the insecure husband who questioned everything, so I let it slide. But then about a month ago, she stopped initiating sex. Don't get me wrong, our sex life has never been fireworks every day, but we always made time for each other. Now, she'd roll over with a quick, "I'm tired," or a dismissive, "maybe tomorrow." I started second-guessing myself. Was I doing enough for her? Maybe I'd let myself go a little since Caleb was born, but I thought we were still a team. Anyway, that's the backstory. Things have been weird, but I was still in denial that anything was really wrong. Turns out I was dead wrong. The tipping point came 2 weeks ago. Jessica left her phone on the kitchen counter while she was in the shower. Normally, I wouldn't even think of touching it, but the screen lit up with a message from someone named Ryan Manliftingweights. The message read, "Can't stop thinking about last night. Same time tomorrow." My stomach dropped. I stood there, staring at the phone like it was about to explode. My brain scrambled for innocent explanations. Maybe it was a co-worker joking around, or a gym buddy being weird. But the tone of the message, it didn't feel innocent. I didn't open the conversation. I still had enough respect, or fear, to stop myself. But something in me shifted. I started noticing things I'd ignored before. Jessica's gym sessions suddenly seemed to last 2 hours, even though she hated working out. She was glued to her phone, smiling at messages and quickly locking the screen when I walked into the room. And then there were the excuses. Random emergency meetings, dinners with coworkers I'd never met, and a lot of "you don't need to wait up for me." The nail in the coffin was the day Caleb asked, "Why doesn't Mommy tuck me in anymore?" I didn't have an answer. Jessica always used to read him bedtime stories, but now she was either working late or too tired. That one hurt. Caleb deserved better. At this point, I was spiraling. I'd never felt more paranoid or helpless in my life. I didn't know whether to confront her, try to catch her in the act, or just bury my head in the sand and pray I was wrong. Then, one night while she was at the gym, I decided to do something I never thought I'd do. I followed her. What I found shattered me. That night, my hands were shaking as I climbed into my car. Jessica had left a good 15 minutes before I did, so I had to guess where she'd gone. Instead of heading toward the gym, I drove toward a small bar we used to go to before we had Caleb. She'd mentioned it in passing a few weeks ago, saying she went there for happy hour with the girls. Sure enough, her car was parked out front. I parked a little down the street, my heart pounding so loudly I could hear it in my ears. I didn't know what I expected to find. Maybe her sitting at the bar, sipping a drink and texting someone, but I wasn't ready for what I actually saw. Through the big front window, I spotted her almost immediately. She wasn't alone. She was sitting in a dimly lit booth with a guy who looked like he walked out of a fitness magazine. Tall, broad shoulders, annoyingly perfect smile. Ryan, I assumed. They weren't just talking. His hand was on hers across the table, and she was leaning in close, laughing in that flirty, over-the-top way she used to with me when we first started dating. I couldn't move. It was like my body had turned to stone. I wanted to storm in there, flip the table, and demand an explanation, but instead, I just sat in my car, watching like a complete idiot. Then it got worse. Jessica slid out of the booth, and Ryan followed her. They walked out together, her arm looped through his. They didn't even check if anyone was watching. They just strolled to his car like they were a couple without a care in the world. I stayed far enough behind that they wouldn't notice me as they drove off, but I couldn't stop myself from following. They ended up at a cheap motel on the edge of town. When they disappeared inside, My worst fears were confirmed. I stayed in the car for another hour, staring at the motel door. I felt like my whole world had crumbled in a single moment. I didn't confront her that night. I couldn't. I needed time to process what I'd seen and to figure out what the hell I was going to do next. The next morning, Jessica acted like nothing had happened. She came home late, claiming the gym ran long and that she was too tired to talk. I stayed up in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I'd ever sleep normally again. When she finally climbed into bed, she smelled faintly of cheap motel soap. That detail hit me like a gut punch. She didn't even try to shower at home and hide it. The following day, I couldn't focus at work. I spent hours replaying everything I'd seen, trying to decide how to confront her. Should I rage, cry, be calm, and calculated? I had no idea. That evening, when she got home, I was waiting for her in the living room. Caleb was at a friend's house, so I knew we'd have privacy. She walked in, dropping her bag on the floor with her usual long day at work sigh. "Jessica, we need to talk," I said, my voice more steady than I expected. She froze for a second, then turned to face me with an annoyed look. "Can it wait? I'm exhausted." "No, it can't." She rolled her eyes and plopped onto the couch. "Fine, what's so urgent?" I took a deep breath and said, "I know about Ryan. I know about the motel." Her reaction wasn't what I expected. She didn't gasp or stammer. She didn't even deny it right away. Instead, she stared at me, her expression blank for a moment before she said, "What are you talking about?" I felt the anger bubbling up. "Don't play dumb, Jess. I saw you. At the bar, holding hands. I followed you to the motel. Do you really think I wouldn't figure it out?" She sat up straighter, her face twisting into a defensive scowl. "You followed me? Are you serious? That's psychotic, Mike. I wouldn't have had to if you weren't sneaking around behind my back." I snapped. Her voice rose. "You have no right to invade my privacy like that." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Privacy? You're my wife. We have a kid together. You think you could just run around screwing some guy and call it privacy?" At that, she finally broke. "Fine. Yes, okay. I've been seeing Ryan. But it's not what you think. He listens to me. He makes me feel appreciated, something you haven't done in years." That felt like a slap. "Years? Are you kidding me? I've been doing everything I can to support you, Jess. I've been here for you, for Caleb, for this family." Her response was ice cold. "Well, maybe that's the problem. You're here, but you're not really here." The conversation devolved into a screaming match, with her throwing out every excuse in the book. How I'd changed, how she felt trapped, how it was just a mistake that spiraled out of control. By the end of it, I was exhausted, hurt, and angrier than I'd ever been in my life. "I want you to pack a bag," I said, my voice shaking. "And get out. We're done." Her face went pale. "Mike, you don't mean that. We can fix this." "No, this. You don't come back from this. Get out." She stormed off to the bedroom, slamming the door behind her. I sat on the couch, my head in my hands, wondering if I'd made the right call, or if my life had just imploded for good. Jessica stayed in the bedroom for an hour, maybe two. I wasn't keeping track. I just sat there, staring at the blank TV screen, trying to process everything that had happened. My emotions were all over the place: rage, sadness, disbelief, and, surprisingly, relief. At least the truth was out now. When she finally emerged, she had a small suitcase in hand and a defiant look on her face. "Fine, Mike. I'll leave tonight. But don't think for a second this is all my fault. You've been checked out of this marriage for years." I didn't even bother responding. What was the point? Anything I said would either fuel the fire or fall on deaf ears. I just watched as she grabbed her car keys and left without so much as a glance back. Once she was gone, the house felt eerily quiet. Caleb wasn't home yet, which gave me time to think, but thinking was the last thing I wanted to do. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her with Ryan. Every time I took a breath, I felt the weight of her betrayal pressing down on my chest. I spent the next couple of hours cleaning up, not because the house was messy, but because I needed to do something. I stripped the bed, threw the sheets into the washer, and packed away a few of her things she'd left behind. It felt like a tiny step toward reclaiming my space. When it was time to pick Caleb up, I had to pull myself together. He didn't deserve to see me like this, confused, angry, and barely holding it together. "Hey, buddy," I said as he climbed into the car. He looked up at me with his big, innocent eyes and smiled. "Where's Mommy?" he asked. I froze for a moment, then forced a smile. "She's staying somewhere else tonight, bud. But don't worry, everything's okay." He nodded, satisfied with that answer, and started rambling about his playdate. I nodded along, pretending to listen, but my mind was a whirlwind. How was I going to explain this to him? How was I going to navigate this mess without destroying his world? That night, after Caleb went to bed, I sat down with a beer in my thoughts. For the first time, I allowed myself to really feel the weight of it all. The marriage I'd fought so hard to build, the trust one thought we had, it was all gone. And the worst part? I had no idea what came next. The next few days were a blur. Jessica hadn't come back, and I hadn't reached out to her. Honestly, I didn't even know where she was staying, and I didn't care. Every time I thought about her, my stomach twisted into knots. I wasn't just angry. I was hurt in a way I didn't know was possible. This wasn't some argument about who left the laundry in the dryer or forgot to pay a bill. This was betrayal on a level I never thought I'd experience. She hadn't just cheated on me. She'd lied to me, disrespected me, and destroyed the foundation of our family. I couldn't stop replaying her excuses in my head. "You've been checked out for years." What did that even mean? Sure, we had our issues like any couple, but I never thought it was this bad. I was blindsided, and that hurt more than anything. The nights were the worst. Once Caleb was asleep, the silence in the house was deafening. I'd sit on the couch, staring at my phone, tempted to text her and demand more answers. But what good would that do? She lied to my face during the confrontation. Why would she suddenly tell me the truth now? I tried to distract myself with work, but even that didn't help. My coworkers noticed I was off, but I wasn't ready to tell anyone. Admitting it out loud felt too raw, too real. The only person I confided in was my best friend, Eric. I called him late one night, and the words came spilling out before I could stop them. "Man, she cheated," I said, my voice shaking. "She's been seeing some guy, a guy named Ryan." Eric was quiet for a moment, then said, "Jesus, Mike, I'm so sorry. Are you okay?" "No," I admitted. "I don't even know what to feel. I'm mengru. I'm hurt. I'm embarrassed. Like, how did I not see this coming?" "Don't do that to yourself," he said firmly. "This isn't on you. She made a choice, a shitty one. That's not your fault." Hearing those words helped, but only a little. I still felt like I was drowning in a sea of emotions, and I didn't know how to swim. The hardest part was putting on a brave face for Caleb. He was too young to understand what was going on, and I didn't want to burden him with the weight of it. I kept things as normal as possible, but every time he asked about Jessica, it felt like another stab to the heart. I was starting to realize that this wasn't just a rough patch. It was a breaking point, and whether I liked it or not, I had to start figuring out how to rebuild my life. A week after Jessica left, I got a message that sent my heart racing. It wasn't from her. It was from an unknown number. The text read, "Hey Mike, this is Ryan. We need to talk." I stared at the screen, my mind going blank. Ryan? Ryan? What the hell was he doing texting me? I felt my pulse quicken, anger bubbling up inside me. How'd he even get my number? What could he possibly want to say? For a moment, I thought about ignoring it. What good could come from talking to him? But curiosity, or maybe rage, got the better of me. I texted back, "Why are you texting me?" Almost immediately, he replied, "Look, man, I didn't know she was married at first. I only found out recently. Can we meet? I think you deserve to know the whole story." The audacity of this guy was unreal, but his message threw me off. He didn't know she was married? That didn't seem possible. Jessica wore her wedding ring everywhere, or at least I thought she did. After pacing the living room for what felt like an eternity, I responded, "Fine. Where and when?" We agreed to meet the next day at a coffee shop downtown. I barely slept that night. My mind kept jumping between wanting to punch Ryan in the face and wanting answers. When I walked into the coffee shop the next day, I spotted him right away. He looked just as I remembered from the bar. Tall, athletic, annoyingly put together. I hated him on sight. "Mike," he said, standing up and extending a hand. I ignored the handshake and sat down. "Talk." He sighed and rubbed the back of his neck, looking uncomfortable. First off, I just want to say I'm sorry. I didn't know she was married. When we met, she told me she was single. I snorted. Really? Single, huh? And you just believe that? He nodded. I did. We met at the gym a few months ago. She didn't wear a ring, and she never mentioned a husband or a kid. It wasn't until about a month ago that I started to piece things together. I crossed my arms, not buying it. And you just kept seeing her anyway? His face flushed. At first, yeah. I won't lie to you, Mike. I screwed up. But when I confronted her about it, she said you two were basically separated. She made it sound like the marriage was over, and you were only staying together for Caleb. That hit me like a punch to the gut. I felt sick. She'd lied to me and to him. She was spinning different stories for everyone involved. She told you that? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Yeah, he said, looking genuinely uncomfortable. But then I started feeling like something wasn't adding up. I did some digging, found your Facebook profile. That's when I realized she'd been lying to both of us. I sat back, trying to process everything. Jessica had built an elaborate web of lies, and now it was unraveling. Ryan looked at me with a mix of guilt and sincerity. I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but I thought you deserved to know. I ended things with her a week ago, and I haven't heard from her since. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to punch him, but another part of me could see he'd been manipulated too. Thanks for telling me, I said finally, my voice cold. But don't contact me again. He nodded, stood up, and left without another word. As I sat there, staring into my untouched coffee, I realized something. I'd been living with a stranger. The woman I thought I knew, the woman I married, was gone. And whoever she'd become was someone I didn't recognize or want in my life anymore. After the meeting with Ryan, I felt more unsettled than ever. On the one hand, it confirmed what I already knew. Jessica was lying, to me and to everyone else. On the other hand, hearing it from Ryan made it feel more real, more humiliating. I spent the next day stewing over everything he said. The idea that Jessica had told him we were basically separated made my blood boil. How could she justify that? How could she twist our life into something so unrecognizable just to excuse her actions? That night, I decided I couldn't let it slide anymore. Jessica needed to hear me out, and I needed to hear the truth, from her mouth this time, no more secondhand stories. I called her, and to my surprise, she actually picked up. What do you want, Mike? She asked, her tone already defensive. We need to talk, I said. Face to face. No excuses, no dañin. Just the truth. I talked to Ryan. There was a long pause. You what? She snapped, her voice rising. You heard me. He told me everything. I know about your little story about us being basically separated. I know you told him you were single at first. I want you to come clean. She sighed loudly. This is ridiculous, Mike. What's the point? You've already made up your mind about me. No, Jessica. You made up my mind when you cheated on me. Now are you coming over? Or do I have to find another way to get answers? After some more arguing, she finally agreed to meet me at the house the next evening. The wait was excruciating. I kept going over what I wanted to say, but nothing felt like enough to express how deeply she'd hurt me. When she showed up, she looked different. Not guilty, not remorseful, angry. Like she was the one who had been wronged. She didn't even bother with pleasantries. All right, Mike, let's get this over with, she said, crossing her arms as she sat on the couch. Why? I asked bluntly, skipping the build-up. Why did you lie to him? Why did you lie to me? Why did you do any of this? She rolled her eyes. I didn't lie. I felt separated from you, Mike. Our marriage has been dead for years. You just didn't want to see it. My hands clenched into fists. That's not an excuse to cheat, Jessica. If you were unhappy, you could have talked to me. You could have ended it before dragging me and Caleb through this mess. Her expression hardened. And what would have changed, huh? You're so wrapped up in your own little world. You wouldn't have noticed. I needed someone who made me feel alive again. You still here? Speak to this. She wasn't even sorry. She didn't care about the damage she'd caused. Do you even hear yourself? I finally said, my voice shaking. You're blaming me for your choice to cheat. You destroyed this marriage, not me. She stood up, her face flushed with anger. You think you're perfect, Mike? You think you've done nothing wrong? You're boring, predictable, and you act like being a good dad excuses you from being a terrible husband. That was the final straw. I stood up, my heart pounding in my chest. Get out, Jessica. We're done. For real this time. You're not welcome here anymore. She stared at me for a moment, like she couldn't believe I was standing up to her. Then she grabbed her bag and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. As I stood there in the silence, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Anger, sadness, and for the first time, a glimmer of relief. The worst of it was over. Now it was time to focus on Caleb and myself. After Jessica stormed out that night, the house felt quieter than ever. But for the first time in weeks, the quiet wasn't suffocating. It was liberating. I didn't have to tiptoe around my own home anymore, waiting for the next lie or excuse. The next morning, I woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. Caleb was my priority now. He was the one good thing I had left from my marriage, and I was determined to shield him from as much of this mess as possible. At breakfast, Caleb looked up from his cereal and asked, "Is Mommy coming back soon?" His question hit me hard, but I kept my voice steady. "Mommy is staying somewhere else for now, buddy. But you and I are going to be okay. I promise." He nodded, seemingly satisfied, and went back to eating. I knew that was just the beginning of the hard questions, though. Eventually, he'd need a better explanation, but for now, I kept it simple. Over the next few days, I threw myself into being the best dad I could be. I picked Caleb up early from school so we could go to the park. I let him choose dinner every night, even when that meant chicken nuggets 3 days in a row. I read him extra bedtime stories and stayed up with him when he had nightmares. At the same time, I started making changes to the house. It wasn't anything drastic, just small things to make the space feel like mine again. I took down some of the pictures of Jessica and replaced them with ones of me and Caleb. I moved some furniture around, cleaned out the closet, and even bought a new set of sheets for the bed. Every little change felt like a step toward reclaiming my life. Eric came over one evening, a 6-pack of beer in hand. "Thought you could use some company," he said with a grin. I laughed, grateful for the distraction. We sat on the back porch while Caleb watched a movie inside. And for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of normalcy. "How's it going?" Eric asked, cracking open a beer. "It's better," I said. "Still hurts like hell, but I'm focusing on Caleb. He's my anchor right now." "That's good, man. You're doing the right thing." We talked for hours about everything and nothing, and by the end of the night, I felt lighter. Of course, there were still tough moments. Every time I saw Caleb's face, I thought about how much he deserved better from both of us. How Jessica's choices had put him in the middle of a situation he didn't ask for. But for the first time in a long time, I started to feel like I could handle it. Like maybe, just maybe, we'd come out stronger on the other side. A few days after my conversation with Eric, something surprising happened. Jessica's sister, Amy, reached out to me. Amy and I had always gotten along well enough, but we were never particularly close. She lived a couple of hours away, and most of our interactions were limited to holidays and the occasional family barbecue. So when her name popped up on my phone, I wasn't sure what to expect. "Hey, Mike," she said hesitantly when I answered. "I've been meaning to call you. I heard about everything." I sighed. Of course, Jessica must have told her family, probably spinning the story in a way that painted me as the villain. "Yeah, it's been a rough couple of weeks," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "Look, I don't know what Jess has told you about me, but I'm not calling to take her side," Amy said quickly. "I'm calling because, well, I think you need to know some things." That caught my attention. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I've suspected for a while that Jess hasn't been honest," she said carefully. "She and I haven't been super close lately, but when we talked, she would say things that didn't add up. And then I heard about Ryan." So Jessica's lies had extended to her own sister. Somehow, that didn't surprise me. "What exactly are you trying to say, Amy?" "I'm saying I'm sorry," she said, her voice softening. "You didn't deserve this. And Caleb sure as hell doesn't. I don't know what's going on with Jess, but I want you to know that if you need anything, help with Caleb, someone to talk to, whatever, I'm here." Her offer caught me off guard. I hadn't expected anyone from Jessica's family to take my side, let alone offer support. "Thanks, Amy. That means a lot," I said, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a small flicker of gratitude. Over the next week, Amy stayed true to her word. She came by to visit Caleb bringing him little gifts and helping out around the house. She even opened up to me about her strained relationship with Jessica. "She's always been difficult," Amy admitted one evening as we sat in the kitchen. "But this is a whole new level. I don't know what's going on with her, but it's not fair to you or Caleb." Her words validated so many of the feelings I'd been bottling up. I wasn't crazy for feeling betrayed or for wanting better, for myself and for Caleb. Jessica must have found out about Amy helping me because, a few days later, she texted me out of the blue. "Wow, I didn't realize you and Amy were best friends now. Guess you two have plenty to gossip about." Typical. I didn't take the bait. I wasn't going to let her turn this into another fight. Instead, I focused on the support I was getting from Eric, from Amy, and even from myself. Slowly but surely, I was starting to rebuild. The more I tried to move forward, the more it became clear that Jessica wasn't just going to disappear from my life. The whole divorce process was something I knew would eventually come, but it hit me like a ton of bricks when I realized how complicated and painful it was going to be. It started with a letter. One afternoon, a lawyer's letter showed up at the door, addressed to me. My hands were shaking as I opened it. It was from Jessica's attorney, and it felt like a punch to the gut. The letter stated her intentions to start the divorce proceedings, outlining custody arrangements for Caleb and the division of assets. There was a lot of legal jargon in it, but the bottom line was clear. Jessica wasn't asking for much. She wanted joint custody of Caleb, and she was seeking spousal support. The nerve of her. I stared at the paper for what felt like forever. It felt like a final confirmation that everything was over. I thought I had already gone through the worst of it. Finding out she cheated, confronting her, seeing the ugly truths, but this letter made it feel real. The life I thought I had was crumbling away in front of me, and there was no way to stop it. That night, after Caleb had gone to bed, I called Eric. "Man, I don't even know what to do. I got a letter from her lawyer today. The divorce stuff is officially starting." "Shit, Mike. I'm sorry, man. That's gotta be rough. I don't even know where to begin with all of this." I admitted, my voice low. "She wants joint custody, which, okay, I can get on board with. But she also wants spousal support. She's still trying to get money out of me after everything she's done." Eric paused. "I get it, but don't let her walk all over you. You have rights too. You've been the primary parent for Caleb. Don't let her use him to manipulate you." I knew he was right. I had been the one taking care of Caleb day in and day out for the past few weeks. I wasn't going to let Jessica take advantage of that, especially not when she had been the one who destroyed everything. The next day, I reached out to a divorce lawyer. Her name was Karen, and she came highly recommended. She didn't waste any time getting me up to speed on what to expect. "Mike, you're going to be fine," she said, her voice calm but firm. "This isn't going to be easy, but we'll get through it. First, we need to focus on the custody arrangement. Since you're already the primary caregiver, I believe we can work toward a fair arrangement for Caleb. As for the spousal support, we'll make sure it's equitable." I appreciated her no-nonsense approach, but that didn't mean I wasn't still anxious. It was hard to wrap my head around the fact that I was going through a divorce at all. The man who'd spent years building a life with Jessica was suddenly just another guy going through a messy breakup. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't stop thinking about what was ahead. I knew it wasn't going to be easy. There would be fights, legal battles, and a lot of emotional pain to process. But I also knew that this was my chance to finally take control. I wasn't going to let Jessica tear me down any further. I wasn't going to let her take Caleb away from me, and I wasn't going to keep funding her lifestyle after everything she'd done. The hard part was just beginning. The days following my first meeting with Karen were a blur of paperwork, phone calls, and awkward conversations with Jessica's lawyer. But the hardest part wasn't dealing with the legal stuff. It was the ongoing battle over Caleb. Jessica's attitude about the custody arrangement shifted in ways I hadn't expected. At first, I thought we'd be able to work something out without too much drama. We were both good parents, and I figured that as long as Caleb was safe and loved, we'd find a way to share time with him. But Jessica? She had other plans. It started with little things at first, comments about how she was the one who'd been there for Caleb's milestones, how she was his mother, and how he needed her more than he needed me. She even tried to guilt me into agreeing to a split where she'd have Caleb more than me. When I pushed back, she played the victim. "You're just trying to take him from me, aren't you? You want full custody, so I can never see him again." This isn't fair, Mike. I felt like I was in a constant state of defense. I didn't want to take Caleb away from her, but I wasn't about to let her use him as leverage or manipulate the situation to suit her. I knew how much Caleb needed stability, and after everything that had happened, it seemed clear that stability would come from me. The turning point came during a meeting with our lawyers. Karen and Jessica's lawyers sat across from each other, talking numbers and visitation schedules. I was listening to the exchange, trying to stay calm, when Jessica finally spoke up. Mike doesn't even care about Caleb's well-being, she snapped, eyes shooting daggers at me. He's only doing this because he's bitter. He doesn't know what's best for him. Ido. I felt my heart race as I stared at her. Was this the same woman I'd been married to? The one who'd promised to share a life with me and build a family? Now she was using Caleb like a pawn in some twisted game of revenge. I wasn't sure what I was more angry about, her words or the fact that she thought she could get away with this kind of manipulation. My hand clenched around the edge of the table. Jessica, you're not doing this. You don't get to rewrite the past and use Caleb as some tool to make yourself look like the better parent, I said, my voice low but steady. I'm not going to let you turn this into a fight for control. Caleb deserves to have both of us in his life, but that's not going to happen if you keep pulling this crap. She opened her mouth to respond, but I wasn't done. I've been the one getting up every night with him when he's sick. I've been the one taking him to school, cooking his meals, reading him bedtime stories. I'm not going to let you take him away from me just because you think you deserve more time. You don't get to use him as a bargaining chip anymore. There was a long silence in the room. Jessica's face went pale, and I could see a flicker of doubt in her eyes. For a moment, she looked almost small. Her lawyer cleared his throat, obviously uncomfortable with the tension. We're here to discuss a fair custody arrangement, he said, attempting to steer the conversation back to neutral ground. But Jessica wasn't done. She stood up abruptly, knocking over her chair. You're unbelievable, Mike, she hissed. You think you're some kind of hero? You think you're the perfect dad? You don't get to control everything. I stood up too, feeling the adrenaline surge through me. I'm not trying to control everything, Jessica. I'm trying to protect Caleb. You don't seem to care about that as much as you care about winning. So if you want to keep fighting, I'm ready, but I won't back down on this. She stared at me, her face twisted in anger and hurt. Then, without another word, she turned and stormed out of the room, her lawyer following her out quickly. The air in the room felt thick, and I sank back into my chair, exhausted. Karen gave me a small, approving nod. You did well, Mike. It's clear you're invested in Caleb's well-being, and that'll matter in court. I didn't feel victorious. I felt drained, but at least for the first time in weeks, I knew that I wasn't the one backing down. The fight was far from over, but I wasn't going to let Jessica use Caleb to hurt me any longer. After that tense meeting, I expected the legal battles to escalate. The emotional toll of dealing with Jessica's manipulations weighed heavily on me, and there were days when I wasn't sure how much more I could handle. But for better or worse, I knew I had to keep moving forward, for Caleb's sake and for my own. As much as I resented Jessica's behavior, I couldn't let it derail me. I'd promised Caleb that I'd be there for him, and I wasn't going to break that promise. Every day, I woke up with the goal of being the best dad I could be, no matter how exhausting or frustrating it got. Jessica, on the other hand, didn't make it easy. She kept pushing for more time with Caleb, trying to turn him against me whenever she could. The most painful thing was when Caleb would come home from visits with her, asking questions I wasn't prepared for. Why don't you and Mommy love each other anymore? Why do you have to fight all the time? I would tell him the truth, but in simple terms. Mommy and I aren't getting along right now, buddy. But we both love you so much, and we're both going to be here for you. I hated that he had to ask those questions. I hated that he was even caught in the middle of this nightmare. But I wasn't about to make him feel like he had to choose between his parents. I kept seeing Karen regularly to discuss the case. Every conversation seemed to reveal just how messy the situation was going to be. There were custody evaluations, child psychologists, financial disclosures. The list felt endless. But in a weird way, I started to take comfort in the structure. The legal side of things at least gave me some semblance of control. One evening, as I was putting Caleb to bed, he looked up at me with a furrowed brow. Daddy, Why are you sad all the time? I wasn't sure how to answer him. I didn't want to lie to him, but I also didn't want to unload all my adult frustrations on his small shoulders. So I just said, I'm not sad, buddy. I'm just tired sometimes. But don't worry, I'm okay. And you make me really happy, you know that? He smiled and snuggled closer. I love you, Daddy. I love you too, kiddo, I said, pressing a kiss to his forehead. And in that moment, everything felt a little bit lighter. Despite everything, I knew I had something to fight for. I had Caleb, and I would do whatever it took to make sure he felt loved and secure. Then, just when I thought I couldn't take much more of the back and forth, I got a call from Karen. I have good news, she said. Jessica has agreed to mediation. She wants to try and settle things outside of court. I didn't know whether to be relieved or skeptical. Mediation? After all the drama? After everything she'd put me through? I wasn't sure I could trust her intentions. But I also knew it was an opportunity to resolve things without dragging Caleb into a long, drawn-out court battle. I'll think about it, I told Karen. But I'm not going to settle for anything that isn't fair to Caleb. She agreed. We'll go in with a solid plan, Mike. We'll make sure everything is handled in his best interest. The thought of it, of possibly ending the fight and moving on with my life, was both terrifying and hopeful. Would Jessica really be willing to put aside her pride and do what was best for Caleb? Or was this just another manipulation? I wasn't sure, but I had to at least try. The day of the mediation arrived sooner than I expected. After weeks of back and forth with Jessica's lawyer, and the ongoing stress of trying to keep things civil for Caleb, it felt surreal that we were about to sit down at a table and talk about the future of our family. I'd been preparing myself for the worst. In my mind, I imagined Jessica showing up ready to fight for full custody or some kind of ridiculous compromise that would leave me constantly juggling schedules while she took advantage of the situation. But as I walked into the mediation room, I realized I was done with guessing. This was the moment. Karen, my lawyer, was already there, reviewing notes when I arrived. Jessica was on the other side of the table, sitting with her attorney. Her posture was stiff, and she barely made eye contact with me as I sat down. It felt like the calm before a storm. The mediator, a woman named Linda, greeted us with a warm smile. She was older, with an approachable demeanor that made me feel like maybe, just maybe, this wasn't going to be a disaster. Thank you both for coming today, she began, her voice calm and reassuring. I understand that emotions are high, but our goal here is to focus on Caleb's well-being. Let's take a moment to discuss what you both want out of this mediation and see if we can find a solution that works for everyone. I looked at Jessica, who was staring at the table now, fiddling with her hands. Her body language was defensive, but her eyes were almost pleading. I just want what's best for Caleb, I said, keeping my voice steady. He needs stability. He needs both of us in his life, but he needs to feel safe and loved. I'm not asking for anything more than that. Jessica finally looked up at me. Her lips pressed together tightly, but she didn't argue. I noticed how much older she looked, the bags under her eyes and the weariness in her face. For the first time in months, I wondered if maybe, just maybe, she was starting to realize what a mess she'd created. I want what's best for him too, she said softly, though there was no emotion in her voice. I don't want him to hate me. I don't want to lose him. I could have been angry at her for the hurt she had caused, for the lies, for everything. But instead, I found myself feeling sad. Sad for her, for the things she'd thrown away, for the damage she had done to both Caleb and me. I leaned forward, choosing my words carefully. Jessica, I don't want you to lose him either. He deserves to have both of us in his life. But we have to stop fighting. We have to stop using him as a weapon. The room grew quiet. The mediator let the silence hang there for a moment before speaking. Okay, Linda said, glancing between us. It sounds like we have the same goal in mind, Caleb's well-being. Let's talk about a custody arrangement that will allow both of you to be a part of his life without any more conflict. For the next few hours, we hashed through every detail. The custody schedule, holidays, how we'd share time with Caleb when things got complicated. I could tell that Jessica wasn't thrilled with some of the compromises, but she didn't push back too hard. We agreed on a 50-50 custody arrangement, with both of us having equal time with Caleb and a third-party therapist to help mediate any future issues. It wasn't perfect. I would have liked more time with Caleb, but I also knew this was the best compromise for him. I couldn't keep pushing for more, especially if it meant dragging Caleb through more conflict. At the end of the session, Linda looked at both of us. "This is a good start," she said. "But remember, the most important thing is that Caleb sees his parents working together, even if it's hard." Jessica didn't say much when we left, but she did look at me for the first time in a long while. Really look at me. I couldn't tell if it was regret or just exhaustion, but whatever it was, it made me feel like we might actually be able to co-parent without all the drama. It didn't fix everything. There were still moments of tension, still awkward silences when we exchanged Caleb at drop-off or pick-up, but something had shifted. We weren't in a tug-of-war anymore. I walked out of that room with a heavy heart, but also with a sense of hope. It wasn't going to be easy, but we were moving in the right direction. It's been a few months since that mediation session, and as much as I never imagined this would be my life, divorced, co-parenting with a woman who still feels like a stranger in many ways, there's been a sense of peace settling in. Not perfect peace, but a kind of tentative peace that I'm learning to live with. The biggest change? Caleb. For the first time in ages, I can see the lightness in his eyes. He's still adjusting to everything, of course. There are days when he asks why his mom and I don't live together, or when he's extra clingy, needing reassurance. But he's adjusting, slowly but surely. And for me, I'm adjusting too. The first few weeks after mediation were brutal. I'll be honest, I was angry. Angry at myself for not seeing the signs earlier, angry at Jessica for what she did to our family, angry at the entire situation. There were nights I'd stay up late, staring at the ceiling, wishing I could rewind time and fix everything. But I've come to accept that I can't. I've stopped dwelling on the what-ifs and started focusing on what I can control. I've started going back to the gym again, picking up old hobbies I had neglected. I'm taking care of myself, mentally and physically, so that I can continue being the dad Caleb deserves. And I'm learning that it's okay to grieve, but it's also okay to move forward. I don't need Jessica to validate me or make me feel whole anymore. I've realized I'm strong enough on my own. Our custody schedule has settled into a rhythm. Caleb spends half the week with me, and the other half with Jessica. The transitions are smooth now, with less drama at drop-offs and pickups. Jessica and I still don't talk much outside of what's necessary for Caleb, but that's fine. There's no need for us to be friends anymore. We're co-parents, and that's enough. There have been moments, especially when Caleb is playing with his toys or telling me about his day, that I'm reminded of how much joy I still get from being a dad. I'm doing my best to be present, to show him that love isn't conditional, that I'll always have his back. And I know that's what matters. I don't know what the future holds. I don't know if Jessica and I will ever be able to be civil on a deeper level, or if we'll always just be those exes who barely talk. I don't know if I'll ever fully forgive her for what she did, but I'm learning to let go of the anger. I'm not going to carry that weight with me forever. For now, it's enough to see Caleb happy. For now, it's enough to know that I'm doing right by him. And as for me, well, I've learned something through all of this. Life doesn't go according to plan. It can break your heart, tear your world apart, and make you question everything you thought you knew about love and trust. But it also has a way of showing you strength you didn't know you had. It has a way of making you realize that even when you're broken, you're not done. If I could go back and tell my younger self anything, it would be this. Life is going to throw shit your way. It's going to hurt and it's going to suck, but you'll get through it. You will. Because in the end, it's not about what happens to you. It's about what you do with it. And as for the advice I'd give to anyone going through something similar, take it one step at a time. Don't try to fix everything in a day. You won't. But focus on the things you can control and surround yourself with people who lift you up. You'll find your way again, even if it doesn't look like what you thought it would. I'm proof of that. And for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm finally on the path to being whole again.